Hello fellow sim racers. Today I'm taking a quick look at the new McLaren MP4 8 for rFactor 2. Unless you've been making a homestead under some kind of mineral outcrop, you're probably aware that Studio 397 has just released 3 new McLaren Formula 1 cars. Outstanding. Now, the MP4 8 has always been a car that's been pretty close to my heart. And when I saw the announcement last weekend, I was understandably excited. But could the reality of the MP4 8 in rFactor live up to the weight of expectation that I would inevitably place upon it? Or would it be more of a case of don't meet your heroes? Well, to cut a long story short, this car is something special. I think it's fair to say that the cars that have been released by Studio 397 of late are absolutely top notch, and the MP4 8 is no different. It looks and drives brilliantly, and honestly, the only area that really lets the car down is the sound, but more on that later. What really impresses me about the MP4 8 is that it passes that most highly subjective of tests, in that it drives exactly as I expected it to. The 1993 F1 season had what were arguably the most technologically advanced cars that the sport had ever seen. Traction control, semi or fully automatic transmissions, and, in particular, active suspension had become the norm amongst the top teams, and the MP4 8 was a sophisticated piece of electrical as well as mechanical engineering. Almost as much a computer as it was a car. But when it comes to the rFactor 2 version, the active suspension that was so critical in these cars hasn't been modelled. But honestly, I'm not sure if it would be practical to implement the type of system used in Grand Prix cars at the time in a commercially available racing simulator. So for me, that's no big deal. What has been modelled is the automatic shifting system that will likely catch some off guard. The system can be disabled in the setup, but I'd recommend leaving it on for a while to experience the car as it was intended. If you watch onboards from 1993, Senna, Andretti and Hakkinen all used the system at times, and from what I can tell, as the year progressed they were more likely to use it than not. You'd be forgiven for thinking that with all of these driver aids, that this is an easy car to drive, and that's not strictly true. Sure, you're unlikely to lose the back end in the slow bits or on acceleration, something at which the cars of the late 80s rather excelled, but the unprecedented grip levels and seemingly limitless traction require a huge amount of commitment from the driver. To sum up, the handling of the MP4 8, it's forgiving, but to drive it at the limit requires lightning quick reflexes and otherworldly precision. But all of that pales into insignificance when compared to the most important aspect of the MP4 8 for rFactor 2, and that's the massive grin it puts on your face whilst driving. Those of you with a more obsessive constitution are probably getting a bit annoyed that I'm using a mix of 92 and 93 cars in this video. 1993 F1 cars for rFactor don't exactly grow on trees, so it's a compromise that I'm happy to make. However, it's worth noting that the ASR Formula cars do appear to be a bit quicker than the MP4 8 out of the box, particularly in a straight line. I'm sure there'll be a plethora of period accurate skins for the McLaren floating around the internet in no time at all. But if you're impatient and you don't want to race a field of 26 McLarens, there are a bunch of fantasy liveries included with the car, intended for use in the McLaren Shadow competition. I mentioned earlier that the only real downside to the MP4 8 is the sound. On board it's passable, though it does sound a bit wheezy for my liking, but the external sounds, well, they aren't great. But I'm not going to dwell on that, it is what it is. I was 7 years old when I watched my first Grand Prix during the summer of 1991. The German Grand Prix was dominated by a British bloke called Nigel, but I don't remember anything about that. What stuck with me was the striking red and white cars. I fell in love instantly, and from that point onwards I would call myself a McLaren fan. The MP4 8 has always been a personal favourite, and I think you can make a pretty good case for it being one of the more significant cars in McLaren's history, despite the relative lack of success compared to its predecessors. This was the final McLaren that Senna drove, and the final car with which he won a Grand Prix. Furthermore, The MB4-8 saw the beginning of Mika Häkkinen's McLaren career after he inherited the seat from the struggling Andretti for the final 3 rounds of the championship. Häkkinen even managed to out-qualify Senna on his first attempt, something that still impresses me 25 years later. And then there's that race at Donington. The MP4-8 was always going to be a tough car to get right, but Studio 397 has managed to deliver. The car lives up to all of my preconceptions, it's incredible to drive, and it passes the does it feel right test. But more than that, it looks convincing on track. If you compare the onboards with the engine cover cameras of the day, the Studio 397 car behaves eerily like the real thing, which is very impressive. The MP4-8 is a very well sorted car, and I'd have been more than happy to pay for it. Studio 397 deserves some real praise for the way that they've been approaching new content of late, with a mixture of paid DLC packs as well as free content. I really like this model, as I tend to be a bit of a magpie with new cars and tracks, so smaller free releases between the premium DLC packs means that it doesn't get all too expensive, and the game keeps being refreshed with new content. So that about wraps things up for this rather rose-tinted look at the Studio 397 McLaren MP4-8. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and if you think the video will be helpful for others, then please consider sharing it. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.